I'm going to talk today about 7mm, specifically a bit larger case 7mm, for shooting our big game. When this really all started coming about was in 1961, when my great friend Les Bowman saw the need to have a 7mm caliber rifle with a large enough case capacity for the powders that we had at the time to shoot elk reliably out to around 500 yards with a 160 grain bullet going around 3,150 feet a second. Now, I've done a piece in the past on the development of the 7mm Remington Magnum. I'm not going to go into all of those details, but this was the original intent, velocity-wise, to get right at 1,800 foot-pounds of residual remaining energy at 500 yards. In those days, about the only powder that we had that would do this was Hudson's 4831. And this is how this was loaded by Les Bowman back many years ago. And of course, encouragement by Les to Remington to come up with this cartridge. They came out with it in 1962. And being fairly close to Les, I thought that I needed one. I was shooting a 300 H&H Magnum for my little bit longer range elk hunting. And so the latter part of 1964, I bought a Herder's U9 FN Mauser type barrel action. That barrel action cost me $98. Complete barrel action, made in Yugoslavia, with a high grade blue. Just a beautiful barrel action with a decent trigger, a good action that fed properly, and so forth. I bought that, and at the same time I sent off to Roberts Wood Products in Marysville, California, and I had them send me a semi-inletted, high-comb rollover curly maple gunstock blank, and I stocked that rifle with that beautiful blank. It was a striking piece of wood. It was solid curls from one end to the other in that blank. 1965, October of 1965, I shot my first elk with the 7mm Remington Magnum, and all shots were less than 150 yards. I spotted the elk from around 600 and some odd yards away, and I got closer. Now, emphasize that I got closer. And at that time, what I could get my hands on at the time were 140 grain Sierra flat base bullets, loaded with 4831, traveling something over 3,200 feet a second. Now, Les and I chronographed these loads on his just about then newly introduced Avtron chronograph. And for years and years, that's what we did all of our testing with, using this Avtron chronograph. Now, right off I had very, very poor results with the 7mm Remington Magnum. I also had poor results on a buck deer with this same load. Yes, I killed the elk. Yes, I killed the deer. By the way, it took 5 shots to get the elk killed, and they were all good hits in the vital area. Same way with the deer. I shot the deer actually with 1 shot, and it traveled quite a ways before I ever found it. And so I was a bit disappointed with this situation. And I immediately did some checking, and I came up with 175 grain Hornady bullets. And I loaded my rifle with those bullets, and I loaded a hunter's rifle with 175 grain Hornady interlocks. Now these bullets would only go just right at about 2,900 feet a second. But this is a far, far better load at 2,900 feet a second than these other bullets. And I've emphasized all along in my videos, irregardless of the range, is the proper bullets for the proper situation. Well, since that length of time, we've come a tremendous ways to do with a lot of powders that are desirable to load for the then developed 7mm Remington Magnum and other cartridges. And as I used that rifle for several years, I came up with the determination that the way to go was a 175 grain bullet, but I needed even more velocity than what the 7mm Remington Magnum was capable of. Well, coming ahead quite a ways, because of situation, because of what I was doing, working, and one thing another, I finally found time to build myself a rifle on a larger case capacity, in a larger case capacity round in 7mm calibers to specifically shoot 175 grain bullets. And in this period of time, I experimented with my 7 Remington Magnum with 175 grain bullets, 175 Hornadys, 175 Nosler partitions. And I didn't find anything wanting, you know, other than the fact that it didn't have enough initial velocity for downrange striking energy to kill elk like I thought it ought to kill elk. Now you got to understand that at the same time I was using a 300 H&H Magnum, eventually rechambered to 300 Weatherby, and so I damn well knew what it took striking energy wise, the remaining residual energy downrange and out there around 500 yards. I wasn't shooting anything past hardly 500 yards whatsoever. Well, I took the 300 Winchester Magnum case and I necked it to 7mm. And basically, in doing so, I increased the length of the neck, so I had a little bit more of a neck length. I ended up with a neck that was 3/10 of an inch long, and I had a 45-degree shoulder on an improved 300 Winchester, 7mm by 300 Winchester. Now this immediately became just hands down, in every way, shape, and form, much better cartridge for killing elk at any distance that was reasonable. That cartridge would do 3,200 feet a second with 175 grain bullets. And I used that rifle quite a bit. And actually, I eventually wore the barrel out on that rifle and I rebarreled it. And I rebarreled it. When I rebarreled it again, of course, to 7x300 Winchester Magnum improved of my design. I made the reamers for the chambering. I made the reamers for the dies, and the whole works, you see, because I was doing tremendous amount of tool and die work, previous to this, and I was in a situation where I could find that kind of time to be able to do these things. And within a year after using that rifle, I had a yearning to even have a rifle with even a little bit more case capacity. And one of the reasons being is that now there was a powder that was available. It was a military pull-down 50 BMG powder, and it was designated WC-860, Winchester Cartridge Company, WC-860. And I got a hold of 100 pounds of this powder for $100. And that's what I loaded in my 7x300 Winchester, and then the new cartridge that I developed and designed and made all the tooling for, reamers for chambering and for dies. The 7mm by 404 Wapiti Express.
What year was that?
And this was in 1984. I finished the rifle in 1984. And at the same time, I was building rifles for friends and neighbors and people from other parts of the country. I was building rifles for 7x300 Winchester improved, 7mm by 404 Wapiti Express. And one of my friends at that time, once a year, he would go to the SHOT Show, and he became quite familiar with the then ballistician for Nosler, a man by the name of Gale Root. And in these contacts, he encouraged Gale Root from Nosler to come out with a 175 grain Nosler partition in Spitzer design. The bullet they'd been making for years was a semi-Spitzer, but this was an outstanding bullet. It really lacked absolutely nothing. So then Nosler made a run of these bullets for testing, and he and I were provided 150 of those bullets for testing. We tested these bullets out of 9 rifles, all the way from a 7mm 08 to the 7mm by 404 Wapiti Express. This friend of mine's rifle was a 7mm by 300 Winchester. And he did quite a bit of shooting along with the shooting that I did, independent of him, but we always compared our notes and everything. And here's where I'm headed with this. We wanted to find out exactly what benefit there was, the Spitzer bullet over the semi-Spitzer bullet. Well, this friend of mine picked up a box of 175 grain Spear Grand Slams, picked up a box of 175 grain Hornadies. We had 175 grain Nosler semi-Spitzers. We had these newly made short run of 175 Nosler Spitzers, and he shot his rifle at 100 yards, and he was shooting. He specifically shot 3-shot groups with all 4 of those bullets at 100 yards with four brands of 175 grain 1.7mm. That rifle shot a 5/8 inch group at 100 yards with 3 of each of those bullets. Now that is outstanding accuracy. The rifle would shoot right at 3/10 with a specific bullet. So basically what I'm telling you is the impact was virtually the same. A composite group of those 4 bullets was 5/8 of an inch at 100 yards. Set up a target, measured it with a Barnes Stroud military rangefinder, set up a target at 700 yards. We had figured out what the drop value was and so forth, and he sat down and he shot 2 rounds of each bullet at 700 yards, holding at the same place on the target. He recovered the target. The target measured 4 3/4 inches for those rounds shot with all 4 of those bullets at 700 yards. Now, according to the testing then and the information that we had, the designation for all of those bullets varied by 100 points in ballistics coefficient. It was then and there that we pretty much started ignoring ballistics coefficient because it had no value whatsoever. If you can shoot a 4 3/4 inch group with 4 brands of bullets of the same weight with the same powder charge and get that kind of accuracy at 700 yards, where in the hell is the ballistics coefficient? It simply did not matter. However, we were precision shooters. We had wonderfully accurate rifles that I built, and we continued to do some of this testing. At that time, Sierra, if you gave them your information of your loads, velocity-wise, your sight-in height at 100 yards, they would give you computer printout information out to 1,000 yards for whatever the situation was at hand. Well, we did exactly that, and Sierra continued to do this for many years until smart Alex came along that seemed to think that they know it all and started to tell a bullet company who knew more about it than anybody else in the business. They were trying to tell Sierra their business that they didn't know what they were talking about. Now, basically, here's where I'm headed with this. It was determined by Sierra back then that over that distance, the ballistics coefficient of those bullets changed a minimum of 3 times over that distance. Now, if the ballistics coefficient changed, this actually changed some of the actual trajectories and how these bullets reacted. So, anyway, I'm going to go on and explain here. We've had for many, many years quite a number of cartridges that were large capacity cartridges, starting out many years ago with P.O. Ackley taking the 300 H&H in 30 caliber and 7mm caliber, and necking that, you know, to those calibers, and improving it, basically a case that was the same capacity pretty much as the 300 Weatherby. So we had a 300 Ackley Magnum, a 7mm Ackley Magnum long, you see, and another man from Oklahoma by the name of Art Mashburn. He was doing the same sort of thing. And one of my wonderful instructors, gunsmithing instructors at Trinidad Junior College, Warren Red Key, he worked for Art Mashburn as a gunsmith before he became an instructor at Trinidad State Junior College and retired quite a number of years after I was educated there in this situation. So I was connected fairly decently, being very close to Les Bowman, having been to gunsmithing school, having been around this man, Red Key, and so forth. And I always learned more from all these people than anybody else was because I had an intense want to learn, want to know, and at the same time doing all this testing myself. And these are all of the things that led to me to designing these cartridges, because I just love to hunt elk and other game, and I love the 7mm round. But what's happened here in the past few years is we've regressed. We've come quite a ways. You know, now we've got the so-called 7mm PRC. Well, this, folks, is going to basically be a flop. It was the flop first time around, and it's going to be a flop the second time around. They took the 300 PRC case and necked it to 7mm and pushed the shoulder back for less case capacity. How stupid do you get? You need a case with the big capacity. The proper thing to have done is take the 300 PRC and necked it to 7mm. Then they would have had a decent round. And fact is, I did exactly this when Ruger came out with the 375 Ruger. I necked it to 7mm and shot 175 and 160 grain nozzle partitions, and 175 grain nozzle partitions out of that would do 31 1/4. Now we've got a 7mm PRC that won't do just but hardly 2,900 feet a second in a standard length action. Another stupid move. You don't put the cartridge of this nature on a standard length action. You need a long magnum action to seat your bullets out where they belong. This is the only way that it can be done. This is all about energy. Now the comment has been made that this 7mm PRC is a 900-yard elk cartridge. Like hell it is. At 2,900 feet a second, the so-called 175 grain Hornady EDLX bullet, which is the poorest designed bullet for game perhaps that's ever come down the pike, but everybody keeps gravitating towards these EDLX bullets. They're poorly designed, they're thin jacketed, they're not capable of doing the job. You use bullets that are designed for the job, certainly not those bullets. And by the way, the remaining energy at 900 yards is only about 1,265 feet of foot-pounds of energy. Well, this is the other aspect. The whiz kids, I call them, the know-it-alls, that think that they know the story, that have never been there and done it like I have and shot many dozens of elk out there in the 600-700 yard neighborhood. They've never shot an elk at 900 yards, but by damn, they call it a 900-yard elk rifle. Well, they've abandoned, first they abandoned the energy values, and in replacing that with ballistics coefficient. Now, ballistics coefficients don't kill game. It is the proper design bullet, the energy, and the sectional density that does the job. You can have the sectional density and the ballistics coefficient, but if you don't have the bullet design, it won't do the job. They've got away from 1,800 foot-pounds of minimal energy, dropped it down the first time around when they come up with some of these other things, down to around 1,500 foot-pounds of remaining energy. Now they're down to around 1,265 foot-pounds of remaining energy. This is hardly enough to kill a mule deer and hit it properly. And my point is, this does not have enough energy to do what needs to be done. This shouldn't be going on. This extreme distance shooting shouldn't be going on at all. You know, this is my point. We've got cartridges out here that'll do the job. The 7mm STW came along about 18 years after I developed the 7mm 404 Wapiti Express. It has the same case capacity. It was used originally by Mary Louise DeVoto in 1,000-yard competition in 1962. shooting 168 grain Sierra Match Kings bullets at 1,000 yards. This was a true 1,000-yard rifle. It shot something like about a 7 and 11/16" group for 10 shots at 1,000 yards. It won. That should have told people something. That was 3,265 feet a second that bullet was running.